the asset itself is creating nothing.
I think it's a scumball activity.
I would short it if there was an easy way to do it.
Hi fellows, this is Easy Investing 101. Kindly subscribe to be an intelligent investor. Firstly, is Bitcoin worthless? Let's listen to what Buffett talks about Bitcoin.
Cryptocurrencies basically have no value, and they don't produce anything, so you can look at your little ledger item for the next 20 years and it says you've got X of this cryptocurrency or that. It doesn't reproduce, it doesn't deliver, it can't mail you a check, it can't do anything. And what you hope is that somebody else comes along and pays you more money for it later on. But then that person's got the problem. But in terms of value, zero. When you buy a farm, you look at the crop every year and what prices are, and you decide whether it was a satisfactory investment. I mean, you look to the asset itself and what it produces for you. When we buy a business, we look at what the business earns and decide how we feel about it in terms of what we paid. But we are buying something that at the end of the period, we not only have what we bought in the first place, but we have something that the asset produced. And when you buy non-productive assets, all you're counting on is whether the next person is going to pay you more because they're even more excited about another next person coming along. But the asset itself is creating nothing. One of the interesting things, for example, is gold. If you go back to the time of Christ and you look at how many hours of labor you had to give up in order to buy an ounce of gold, and you take it forward to now, you'll find the compound rate maybe 1/10 or 2/10 of 1%. And then you have to insure it during that time and make sure somebody doesn't steal it from you and everything. But it doesn't produce anything. And productive assets, you can pay too much for a productive asset. But I bought a farm in the 1980s, and every year look at how much it produced the way of soybeans and corn. And at the end of that period, I've still got the farm, and I've gotten some significant income off of it. Apartment house, operating business. But if you and I buy various cryptocurrencies, they're not going to multiply. They're not going to be a bunch of rabbits sitting there in front of us. They're just going to sit there. And I got to hope next time you get more excited after I bought it from you, and then maybe I'll get more excited and buy it from you. And actually, we could sit in the house by ourselves, and we could keep running up the price between the two of us. But at the end of the time, there's one Bitcoin sitting there, and now we got to find somebody else, and they come to an end. I mean,
that's a greater fool theory. That's what you're saying.
It's buying something because you expect the pool of people who want to buy it because they want to sell it to somebody else will grow, and it's wonderful because it does create a rising price. Does create more buyers, and people think I've got to get in on this, and it's better if they don't understand it. That's the other thing about non-productive. If you don't understand it, you get much more excited than if you understand it. I mean, if you buy a bond that says it's going to pay you 4% a year, you're not going to get any pleasant surprises. She's going to pay you 4% a year. But if you can have anything you want to imagine. If you just look at something and say that's magic, you can do it with shark's teeth or seashells or anything. And they did it with tulips in the 17th century in Amsterdam, and they'll do it again. I mean, people, they like to speculate. They like to
Okay, let's see what Charlie Munger says about Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is worthless artificial gold, which if it succeeded would facilitate a lot of illicit activity. Now that is not something I think the world needs. I do think that a properly run bank is a great contributor to civilization, and that the central banks of the world like controlling their own banking system and their own money supplies. So I don't think Bitcoin is going to end up the medium of exchange for the world. It's too volatile to serve well as a medium of exchange. And it's really kind of an artificial substitute for gold. And since I never buy any gold, I never buy any Bitcoin. And I recommend that other people follow my practice.
Well, Bitcoin as the computer science that's behind Bitcoin is a great triumph of the human mind. That's what captivates a lot of these people. They've actually created a product that's hard to create more of, but not impossible. Now that is very peculiar, but they've managed to do it. So a lot of the computer science people love it just because it's such an extreme achievement of computer science. I, of course, have no interest in that because it's not my subject. And I see an artificial speculative medium that people are buying just because they think they can sell to somebody else at a higher price, even though it inherently has no intrinsic value. And so I regard the whole business as antisocial, stupid, immoral.
Immoral?
Yes,
Why
immoral.
is that? Why?
Why would you trade? Suppose you could make a lot of money trading freshly harvested baby brains. Would you do it, or would you say that's immoral? You wouldn't trade them, would you? It's too awful a concept. Well, to me, Bitcoin is almost as bad. It's not having any desirable social purpose. We've got debit cards. It isn't like we don't have a payment system. We've got WeChat in China, incredibly efficient payment system. China doesn't need Bitcoin. And if you have a WeChat, why would you do it in a medium where the value changes enormously? Nobody in his right mind would want a payment system where the very thing you were using went up and down by 20% in a day. No, I regard the thing as a combination of dementia and immorality. And I think the people that are pushing it are a disgrace. There ought to be some things that are beneath you that you just don't do. And this is one. We did not need a gold certificate. I mean, a gold substitute like this.
Let's find out what Ray Dalio shares about Bitcoin.
Well, I'm not going to give the precise amount of Bitcoin, but I do own some Ethereum as well. But the answer to your question is that I don't own a lot of it. I view it as an alternative money in an environment where the value of cash, money, is depreciating in real terms. And I think it's very impressive that for the last 10, 11 years, that programming has still held up. It hasn't been hacked and so on, and it has an adoption rate. So I'm very big on diversification, and it's a relatively small part of the portfolio. I would like to say that cash, I've been quoted, cash is trash, cash, which most investors think is the safest investment, is, I think, the worst investment, and that it's important because it loses buying power. The one thing I would say to investors is don't judge anything in your returns or your assets in nominal terms, in terms of how many dollars you have. View it in terms of inflation-adjusted dollars. And so cash, like this year, you'll lose 4 or 5% to inflation. And so pay attention to those, because I believe that that'll be the worst investment. And then beyond that, the important thing is to diversify one's portfolio well, because we know from that the surprises in the balance. We also know that those asset classes on average significantly outperform and will significantly outperform cash, and that they move between each other in a way that that has to do with correlations, because of when things go down, when the economy goes down, then bonds will do better than stocks, and so on and so forth. So diversification of assets. I view crypto as a small piece of that, and the message is cash is going to be a problematic asset, and hold that other diversified portfolio of assets, looking at it in real terms, not nominal terms. And that diversification should be also international diversification, from countries, not just asset classes, in order to have a truly well-diversified portfolio.
Well, I think it's worth considering all the alternatives to cash and all the alternatives to some of the financial assets. And so Bitcoin is a possibility, is that a merit? Right. I have a certain amount of money in Bitcoin. It's a small percentage of that which I have in gold, which is a relatively small percentage of what I have in my other asset classes and so on. And I think that has the merit. It's an amazing accomplishment to have brought it from where that programming occurred to where it is in the test of time. On the other hand, if it's successful, it's going to not be, the governments don't want to have it successful. You don't want to have an alternative currency.
But we're starting to see governments like El Salvador. I know that's not exactly going to be the leading government on this, but there are governments that may take this on.
But no. You have El Salvador taking on, and you have India and China getting rid of it, and you have the United States talking about how to regulate it, and it can still be controlled. So that's right. what it looks like. If you're El Salvador and you talk about your alternative monies, it's a different thing.
Do you believe that regulation ultimately will make something like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have a future, or do you think regulation will kill it?
Well, I think I think at the end of the day, if it's really successful, they'll kill it, and they'll try to kill it, and I think they will kill it because they have ways of killing it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have, a place, a value, and so on. But it's one of those things that has it doesn't have intrinsic value. If you put cryptocurrencies, or let's say Bitcoin, in the historical perspective, right? There are so many things in a historical perspective that were given that didn't have intrinsic value and have perceived value, and then became hot, and then they become cold. And so it could be either way. You just have to know what it is, right? I mean, it could be tulips in Holland, and the intrinsic value. So what is the value? And then there are technological changes. I'm no expert on that. I'm just trying to say that you asked me what my opinion is. Take it for what it's worth. I'm no expert on it. I think diversification values, it matters. I suspect the real question that investors should be asking themselves is how much stuff like that do they have? How much stuff do they have? Do they have gold? Okay, should we be talking about how much you have in gold versus how much you have in Bitcoin? And do you have a diversification in those kinds of things that we might call intrinsic value money? Because we have a fiat monetary system, okay? With a fiat monetary system, where is your hard money? That's the question, and however you go after it, I think that's the question to be answered.
And finally, listen Bill Gates shares about Bitcoin.
I don't own Bitcoin. I'm not short Bitcoin. So I've taken a neutral view. I do think, moving money into a more digital form and getting transaction costs down, that's something the Gates Foundation does in developing countries. But there we do it so that you can reverse the transactions, so you have total visibility of who's doing what. So it's not about tax avoidance or illegal activity. But Bitcoin can go up and down, just based on the mania or whatever the views are. And I don't have a way of predicting how that will progress.
Somebody gave me some for my birthday. And then a few years later, I thought, hey, I'm going to sell that. So no, there's some really good technology in terms of sharing databases and verifying transactions that is talked about as blockchain. That is a good thing. Bitcoin and ICOs, I agree completely. It's one of the crazier speculative things where it's not as an asset class, you're not producing anything, and so you shouldn't expect it to go up. It's kind of a pure greater fool theory type investment. I agree. I would short it if there was an easy way to do it.
Well, Bitcoin uses more electricity per transaction than any other method known to mankind. And so, it's not a great climate thing. Now, if it's green electricity and it's not crowding out other uses, eventually, maybe that's okay. So I don't see the topics as deeply related, even though you might label me a Bitcoin skeptic. That is, I haven't chosen to invest money. I buy malaria vaccines. I buy measles vaccines. I invest in companies that make products. It's not hey, somebody's going to buy this for more money than I pay for it. But, if other people find their fortune that way, I applaud them.
But you don't think, and there are people who believe this. I'm sticking with the climate thing on Bitcoin for a second. There are people who believe, and these are Bitcoin bears, that given the energy requirements to create and maintain the Bitcoin network, that actually ultimately, given all of the societal efforts for climate, that actually regulators or rules would be imposed or make it more expensive to actually hold Bitcoin.
No, I should look at the most bullish projection on what percentage of the electricity demand it would be. There are other ways of doing digital currency that our foundation is involved with, which are done in local currency. The transactions are not secret. They're reversible. You can't use it for ransom or things like that. And yet the transaction fees are so low that it's empowering the poorest. So, we worked with India to do their digital currency. We're working with all the countries in Africa. So I'm a huge fan, the biggest investor philanthropically in digital currency so that financial services are available to everyone on the planet.
Well, look, Elon has tons of money and he's very sophisticated. So, I don't worry that, his Bitcoin will sort of randomly go up or down. I do think people get bought into these manias who may not have as much money to spare. So I'm not bullish on Bitcoin. And, my general thought would be that, if you have less money than Elon, you should probably watch out.
Why aren't you bullish on Bitcoin?
It's look, there are things we invest in society that produce output. Bitcoin happens to use a lot of energy. It happens to promote anonymous transactions. They're not reversible transactions. The Gates Foundation does a lot in terms of digital currency, but those are things where you can see who's making the transaction. So digital money is a good thing. And there's a different approach that's local currency and attributed, deals with all the money laundering and terrorism type regulations, and yet gives you the very the convenience and the low cost of transaction. And so, our foundation is very proud that in the pandemic, a lot of the countries we funded to do this were able to get money out to their citizens very, very efficiently. So that's something that it's not got the visibility of Bitcoin, but the move towards digital money that we're very engaged in is a super positive thing that eventually will get to even the poorest countries.
If you think Bitcoin is good, just comment your reason below.
Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and comment your idea for the next